you feel like you've actually been somewhere.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Decoding Cocktails podcast. I'm your host, Chris LeBeau. The goal of this show is to understand the inner workings and evolution of mixology, hospitality, and community. As I further my own knowledge of the field, I'm inviting you to join me. You'll hear me interview people from around the industry about their work and beliefs. If you like what you hear, the best way to keep up is to subscribe via the podcast app you use. And if you think others will like this, I invite you to share an episode or write a review. Your words help grow our audience. And you can keep up with the latest news via our newsletter, Cocktail Confidential, or see what we're working on via Instagram. And please reach out. I'd enjoy hearing what you liked, learned, and what else you'd like to see me dig into. So let's get into it. My guest today is Steve Smith. He's worked in the restaurant industry since a mere age of 13. He began by washing dishes at a basement bar and restaurant. He's worked in plenty of other capacities around St. Louis in concerts, sporting events, professional driving, labor, and vending beer at multiple ballparks. He opened the Royale in 2005 and the TikTok Tavern in 2014. So one of the reasons that I was excited to be able to interview Steve actually came out in a comment he says during the course of the interview, but I feel like it applies to his bar, and that is when we talk about a number of great bars while we were together, and that part did not make the podcast. However, they are in the show notes, so if you're looking for bars, and Steve highly recommends you get outside of your comfort zone and visit bars around town, go in there with a great attitude. But he said of many places that, when you walk into a really distinctive bar, you feel like you've actually been somewhere. And this honestly really resonates with me. I've experienced this a couple times, especially in more, cosmopolitan, faster moving, transient parts of cities around the country. I think about the lovely city of Denver, where I spend a lot of time with my brother, or Nashville. I remember one time in particular being in a hip, quote-unquote, part of downtown Nashville and thinking, you know what? I feel like if you told me that I was in Denver right now, I would believe you, because there was kind of this look and feel sometimes to more modern construction. There are templates that are followed, and this can be effective, but at times can also create a more generic as opposed to very idiosyncratic and unique experience. And when you go to a bar like the Royale, you really feel like you've been somewhere. The art on the walls, the kind of more tight menu, as Steve will talk about a little bit in the interview, and really just the wide cast of characters that exist at a bar like that. Another thing that's interesting about Steve, as I talk about all the time in my little world, is that the Royale is, by many accounts, the first real cocktail bar of this age, if you will, that St. Louis has a proud cocktail history. But prior to the Royale, as Steve puts it during the interview, you might have found a good number of shot lists around town, but finding a cocktail list was fairly uncommon at that point. And so when he opened the Royale, he wanted to have this great mixture of more, well or working class versus nicer things available. But in addition to that, to debut drinks like a sidecar or his one of the drinks he's had on the menu for forever, the Subcontinental. And Steve talks about, in addition to having to, of course, learn what works and what doesn't, which is all part of the game, to watch customers' tastes mature over time is also fun. But taking also a step back in time, to wherever you're listening to this, your own city evolving. But St. Louis, as he puts it, this was a one-company town for a long time, and Anheuser-Busch it was everywhere. It was just what you expected, and, finding something as simple as Guinness or a Corona was kind of a luxury. And he even talks about that prior to AB being purchased, that if he were to get his hands on something like a cask of beer, that he would have a line out the door because you couldn't get beer out of a cask anywhere in town. And now, craft beer across the country has just exploded, and we're witnessing spirits and cocktails along the same trajectory. Another thing, the Royale opening in 2005, and I don't remember exactly when I first went there. And, my early memory, who knows what that is exactly, but it is different from many of the places that I probably went to in my younger years in terms of like, okay, how many drinks can you put down, how quickly, shots, etc. He said he really envisions the Royale because Steve talks about wanting this to kind of be a public house, a place for community and fellowship, that a place where you, quote unquote, drink at your best. And, I know that there have been many patrons who have been quite inebriated, I'm sure, over the years at the Royale, but like this isn't a place where you just come to just tie one on, but to come and really build memories and be with people in a way. And so I loved hearing him talk about that sometimes he'll see people come in that he's like, that seem pretty young, and like, are they going to be ready for an establishment like this? But that hopefully also it can serve as a training ground for how to drink at your best. So I think that's something interesting to reflect on. The final thing I will lay out there, because we've all obviously been through the ringer over the past couple of years, is that I asked Steve about a legendary night that he recalled at the Royale. And the bar's been open, for 17-ish years now, so there's plenty of opportunity. But it was, I really liked it because he took the time. One of the memories he shared was actually from the pandemic. And it was cool to hear him not only share a night that he really remembered in particular, but to also hear him say, oh yeah, this is why I'm in business. This is a moment when I can look at what's happening here and say, we are providing an important service. So I hope you'll look out for that part of the interview. A lot will be in the show notes today. Steve covers a lot of ground regarding various bars in St. Louis, but also the things that I think are useful tidbits to consider. So with that, enjoy this interview because Steve is a fascinating character with all sorts of knowledge. Okay, so Steve, first, thanks for taking some time today. I appreciate it.
Sure thing.
Something that came to mind earlier today. My girlfriend and I, we've been seeing each other for about 8 months now. I think actually she told me 8 months on Friday, for those that care. And but while she was born here in St. Louis, she lived on the East Coast for 25-ish years, and she'd been back in town for about a year prior to us going out. Mm-hmm. And when we talked about places to go, she had already covered some bases, but she hadn't been to the Royale. And I was like, I think I'm actually constitutionally obligated to bring you here as a St. Louisan, just because, I feel like you've certainly worked, you've built a great institution here. So for people that haven't been to the Royale for one reason or another, tell us a little bit about this bar, what you were aiming for when you started it, and
Sure.
and such.
I opened the Royale in 2005. So we've been around for a minute now. And when I opened up South City, St. Louis City in general was different. The bar scene was definitely different. There were a lot of great things about it. But I was introducing something a little bit different. I wanted a civilized spot that kind of welcomed different types of crowds. I have a way I've said it in the past is it's a place that you can hang out with your friends, you can go on a date, or you can even take your mother to, and it's going to hit all those spots and still feel comfortable for you to be in. You don't feel like you're in it for the other person necessarily to, please them. It's going to please everybody. Neighborhood bar. We're right in the middle of South City, right off of Tower Grove Park, a pretty dense neighborhood. And so a classic American corner bar that's been upgraded a bit. And in 2005, you didn't see a ton of that. You see them a lot more now. and a lot more developed cities, like in the Midwest in particular, have very highly developed neighborhood bars. Not necessarily like all just fancy places or chic or very hip, but very well appointed and connected to their neighborhood. And that's something that I've been living in South City since I was a teenager, and have a lot of very strong, long connections down here. And bringing a place that was presentable with some upgraded, finer cocktails, being very thoughtful about that, something that hadn't really hit yet much around here, at least in the particular times that we're in now. And the beer is very complicated here in the great beer city of St. Louis. So to do things differently in terms of beer is definitely a noticeable thing. And it's something that, this bar, along with, I was not the only one, but there are bars that started really diversifying their offerings and the styles of beer and the types of breweries that they were being offered from. And then upgrading also what is thought of as bar food. And now I will be very honest here, is that I did not intend on opening a restaurant here. Not a lot of people know that. My intent was definitely to open a bar, but you can certainly tell that if you know me, and if you look around the bar, we are bar forward with certainty, without apology. But as I started to dabble with the food, I was working with a lot of really great people, still work with some of those great people today, that encouraged me to more further develop a full menu out of a tiny bar kitchen. Not a kitchen, a bar kitchen. So this bar kitchen is most likely smaller than the one you have in your home, with certainty, if you have a house, probably smaller than the one in your apartment. It's a 3-person kitchen, and it's tight, super tight. In fact, I can show you on the way out of here. It's miraculous that I didn't even know we would be able to serve the amount of food that we have. And that has been actually a very fun and complicated and laborious trek since then, of having food in a bar forward kind of place. And I've been very grateful that we've been able to pull it all together and do this in the last now 17 years, with a couple shutdowns, of course, during a pandemic. Maybe another one. Who knows what's coming up? But it's I wanted to elevate what you experience in a bar for meeting up with your friends, not just your typical spot that you could be filled in by almost any other place. And those places have high function, and I value them, and I even go to them, but I just wanted to offer something a little bit different. Now you can see them actually, they're around. There are a lot more places that have little tips that are closer, that, when we were starting, you can see them kind of going that way. You see the bar food in St. Louis is exceptionally better. The beer offerings is everywhere, almost everywhere. Like 90% of the places now is, when it used to be like 5% of the places, now it's 90% of the places are like, usually you could get pretty good beer almost anywhere, or at least a beer that you would really like, depending on what you want. I mean, beer is, subjective, of course, to the drinker. I don't want to cut anybody out, but and most places didn't have cocktail menus. They would have maybe a shot menu or a special on a whiskey and Coke or something, but you never really saw cocktails being poured, and especially in such a beer town like this one, that beer had been pushed awful hard. Cocktails have been suppressed for a while, although we do have actually a very strong cocktail history here, going way, 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 way back, but it had been pushed down for a while. And then it kind of bloomed again along with the beer right around the same time, which was actually been kind of great to own a bar in the city. And the scene has definitely changed a lot, and I know we're going to get into that. I'm actually kind of excited, because now that we have some time under our belt, I can actually think about it well, something that I kind of had a feeling about when I opened up, that things were changing, and how I wanted to be a part of this, that I wanted to be a part of that change. And I was already there. And but we also have continued to sort of change things up a little bit, and I've had to continue to do so, especially during this global pandemic that we're under.
As a quick aside, not having been in the kitchen before, one thing that I can certainly know, at least visually as a patron, if you're sitting on the patio in the nice months during service, you will certainly see people from the kitchen going back and forth across, pulling stuff from, I gather you got a walk-in out
That's
there.
exactly correct, in the garage.
And obviously in terms of a 3-person, kitchen, I think they do it the exact same way over at the Mud House on Cherokee too. So
So we have our prep foods and everything are kind of strewn about outside of the kitchen. In fact, that kitchen at the Mud House was very efficient, but our kitchen's still about half the size of that one. And the dish station's in there too, which is a lot of people outside the industry might not fully realize about how important every square inch is that you can use. And it's more like a submarine style kitchen, which is actually kind of fun. All these things are challenges. And some people are like, oh, I wish you had all these other things on your menu. And I'm like, well, there's only so many things I can offer. And honestly, I'm okay with that, because I'm not looking to be a restaurant with like 5 pages of stuff on it. I'm just looking to be like a place you can meet up with your pals, get some good time in with people, order some really good food, get some great drinks. It doesn't have to be everything. And nor does that's what's so wonderful, especially about a city like St. Louis, where the Royale might not be your cup of tea. That's fine. There are hundreds of other places out there that are fantastic that you can go to and appreciate. And there's not just one only bar out there. And that's what's so great. I go to other places too. And I know we're going to touch on that. And that's a big passion of mine too, is I love going to other places all the time.
Yeah, and I do look forward to kind of picking your brain on it. But something you said, especially the arc that drinks have been on, but before even the cocktail thing, opening up a bar here in a at least former beer capital. We obviously have a wonderful craft scene, and AB still plays a presence, but for a place that seems like for a long time it has had a fairly diverse selection, for an outsider looking in, what is it like in 2006 or whatever, trying to offer a diverse selection of beer in a town that at the time was run by Anheuser-Busch?
It was a one-company town, Anheuser-Busch. It was not uncommon to have, in fact, it was common for bars in the city and in this part of the country, really, to have only Budweiser products. And it was kind of considered odd to even carry other things. It's considered fancy to have Guinness or something. So to come in to St. Louis, the diversity of products were kind of relegated by a main brewery. I mean, it took a lawyer to open up Schlafly. It wasn't a brewer, he was a lawyer, and it was tricky. And now things have changed. People are excited, we got other offerings, but at that time, it was suppressed. It was definitely a suppressed time. You could find your beer. You had to seek it out. You really had to kind of go around. There was literally just a handful of places in the South Side, which is a huge area, that would carry more than maybe 1 or 2 beers that were not lagers. And so entering into that time, I knew that there were people that wanted to try that. I wanted to try it. I know my peers wanted to try it. We were already going places already that we wanted to do that. And we could tell that direction was clearly going to go. There's still absolutely a market for lager beers, including from myself. I do appreciate a good lager, a Pilsner, stouts I'm a big fan of. But to be able to try so many different beers, and everybody was eager to even make them if they could get their hands on brewing equipment. And I knew that if we had a place that could offer these things and a balance of them, and that's another thing, is having to learn how to do a proper balance of different types of beer. More is not better necessarily. It's great to go to a place that's got 96 taps, but really there's a lot of caveats to having 96 taps, is keeping your beer fresh, of course. But being able to balance that on 12 taps, 10 taps, 14 taps, and to keep them moving is a science as well. And that's something that I've had to learn. You can't just stick with the same beers, even if people love them. You know, you got to keep moving them around a little bit, keep introduce people into it. And the scene has evolved since then. I mean, before I could get a cask of beer, and it didn't matter what it was. Nobody could get a cask, and I would have a line out the door just for the cask. Now the beer scene is, I think a good term is saturated. There are, I guess in 05 when I opened up, there was maybe 2 or 3 breweries that were not Anheuser-Busch in this town. And Schlafly was really the big one. I think it was O'Fallon, and I think the other one was closed like Route 66 downtown or something like that. It was like a novelty type of place. There may have been one other one. Anyway.
Like Square One was probably brewing beer at that point, but it was that was real small.
Yeah, I'm not sure. They opened up right around the same time I did, so they may not have even been doing it.
Fair point.
Yeah. But that all changed. Things were opening up, but that all changed. I think it was like 08, 09 when the buyout happened, when the Brazilians and Belgians came in and threw down a bunch of money around town. Well, of course, in that, with all that money being thrown around, a lot of the talent from Anheuser-Busch now had a big payday, and they know how to do one thing. And so now we have a plethora of breweries in this town. In fact, we're lousy with breweries. I mean, it was probably the fastest growing brewery market. I mean, there were other cities like Portland, Oregon, or whatever spots that are not traditionally known for beer that had tons of breweries, but it was not a natural brewing town. And so we already had a huge demand for beer. And then we have all these people that all they knew what to do was to make beer, market beer, distribute beer, package beer. Now they're sitting on, fund. And so, you got Urban Chestnut, you got Perennial, Side Project. I mean, I could name off maybe another 50 that had opened up in the course of maybe 10 years, which is nuts for a market like this. So it's been a great renaissance, and to be a bar in this. Now, I will say there is something of a flip side too, is that now as a consumer, it's fantastic. I have breweries. I've got 1, 2, 3, I don't know, depending on how far you want to consider. Within a bicycling distance, I have like probably 5 or more breweries I can go to that have beer halls on them. And some of these beer halls are enormous. And now all of a sudden you go from like, I'm the place where you can get a good craft beer to like, you can go anywhere. In fact, you can go to these giant halls. Like some of them, I'm sure probably could get close to like, I don't know, 500, 800 people in them, maybe more. I don't know. With Urban Chestnut is enormous. And Civil Life is expanding. And even Second Shift is not a small facility. And so it is a different landscape. Like all of a sudden, like you're a real big beer head. They used to come here exclusively because we were one of the few places you can go down maybe a couple of tap rooms, but the brewery tap rooms. But now it's like they'll come here, but but we are a bar. So it's an interesting relationship to have now with breweries that are in direct competition for what we're doing. But honestly, we're just going to continue what we do best. They're going to continue doing what they do best. And I think people do appreciate having a neighborhood bar. Not everything has to be a brewery. Not everything has to be a distillery. And, I'm not looking to become a brewer. That people floated that by me more than once. And I did think about it, but that's not my personal passion. Is not to brew beer. It's certainly to get together with the good people with some fine drinks and, be neighbors, be neighborly, and keeping those standards up, and then getting involved with things. I don't necessarily need a manufacturing facility for that, though.
Mm-hmm. So I think, applying a longer landscape, we've obviously talked about beer and the proliferation we've witnessed here in St. Louis. Mm-hmm. Obviously, we'll talk about the cocktail thing too, but it strikes me, I know that if my research is correct, you did some of your own R&D when you were opening the Royale in Chicago and maybe some other places. Uh-huh. But it strikes me nationally, regardless, that some places may have been slightly bigger cocktail or more diverse beer markets, but what we're witnessing everywhere right now in terms of proliferation of beer, proliferation of spirits and cocktails, everything for a long time, I think, had largely been much more brief, concise than it is now. Is that your read? Is that what you remember when you were kind of making that call and you were shopping in other markets, or did they have a wider selection of product there?
There were some wider selections in some of these places I went to. I went with a longtime advisor and friend, Tim O'Connell, who I know that you actually did some research and found out. We went up on a road trip. It was probably about 2 or 3 months before I opened this place. It was in January of '05. And we went to Chicago and Milwaukee. And Chicago had some elements of the beer's expansion. It's not really a brewery city. I mean, they might try to say that, but they're not. Not like here, not like Milwaukee. But I mean, they love their beer. Absolutely. And I noticed that some of the things they were doing in terms of spirits that were being done on a more common circumstance. We'd see them with in a regular neighborhood, not a lot of them, but they were there. And the same in Milwaukee. Now, Milwaukee was more beer laden. I'd say more their vibes were more developed in terms of their neighborhood vibe. And I was particularly fond of the Milwaukee beer scene, or bar scene, not necessarily the beer scene. But in terms of spirits, Chicago, there's a few places, the Matchbox, at least at the time, and I believe it's turned over at least once since then. And they've expanded, but at least when I was going in, and it was prior to then, but I went back and I just wanted to see what it was like. It was like, what is it like to go into this place in the middle of the afternoon, or, at a non-peak time, not weekend time, or when the weather's bad, as the neighborhood showing up, what are the neighborhood drinking? So, what's the selection that they're offering? They would offer a cheap beer, but they would also offer, like a Belgian triple. They would offer, you could get yourself a Royale whiskey for a modest price, but you could also get a decent Scotch or a decent low batch whiskey. And I would see that, and I want both of those things. I come from a background of working in this industry where you may only have, sometimes you had a really good shift and you have more money, more cash in your pocket than perhaps you should have, and you should put it in the bank, but instead you go out and you drink it and you want to drink some fancy stuff and eat some fancy food. But then there's sometimes you come off a shift and you got $10 in your pocket, but you still want to have a good time. And how do you do that? Well, I guess I'm not going to have 10 drinks tonight, but I can still get, 3 250 beers, or, I'm talking a while ago when we'd have those prices, I mean, when I started off, beer was considerably cheaper than it is now, but I think it's still a good value. But I noticed that, I wanted to make sure that that diversity had happened within the spirits and the beer, and to be able to have that balance, to not just be a craft beer or craft cocktail place, but to certainly offer that, and to be able to offer some nicer drinks that can be still at a decent price without having to, pay the higher prices that, now granted, of course, everything's expensive now. Everybody's had to raise their prices in the last 18 months. So sometimes I kind of cringe at my own prices too sometimes, but it's a survival thing, and it's just what it is. So I get nostalgic for these old prices too, as we all do. But we got to remember that these prices are what keep us going. If you're going to demand it's just going to be cheaper, well, you're going to have to go to a different place.
Right. I think about some of the dive bars you go into where I feel like they should almost have a sign on there where, one, I want these places to stay in business, but right. Sometimes when you see the price of a beer that you order, it's like, what year is it right now? Because exactly. How can you be charging me $2 for a 16-ounce draft pour, or whatever? And maybe it's because they've owned the building for 30 years, but it's crazy sometimes.
It is crazy, and I often enjoy it. And there's places, like that I love that have very cheap drinks sometimes, and I continue to go to them, and it's great. Granted, I think owning the building, and also some of those places look like their investment in their infrastructure might be a little lacking. Some deferred maintenance, perhaps. I'm sure you would notice in the bathrooms they might not be as well appointed as some other places. And that's something, as you know, as I actively reinvest in my building, as we are actually meeting upstairs because my walk-in cooler is being rebuilt, and I'm having beer chutes rebuilt, and I've had all sorts of things that I constantly invest in because, I don't know, I really like my business and I want it to operate as best as possible. It's just treating your place right. And, it's if it's just about this, I can appreciate a cheap beer, but that's not what it's about. I don't know. If it's just about cheap beer, then just go to the places with specials all the time.
Sure. So it does feel like kind of a natural segue at this point to ask.
Mm-hmm.
So whether it's for, the St. Louisan themselves, someone driving through, or touring people around town when they're here, and this could be obviously public establishments, but, knowing that you are such a booster for the city in general, where are some local watering holes or nicer establishments that you think people really should check out?
Well, there are some great establishments around town that I've always loved. I used to write for Sauce Magazine back in the day, and I would go drink at my point was I want to drink in every neighborhood in the city, and I've had a drink in an actual bar in every single neighborhood in this city, and they are very different from each other in many ways, but the one common theme on a lot of these places is that they're there to have a good time. It's people from the neighborhood coming together to sit together and have a good time, and that's universal. And if you're there to go have a good time, then I think it's going to go very well. And a lot of people get really intimidated, especially, you go, whether it's North Broadway or South Broadway, probably almost in any city on a North Broadway or South Broadway, you can get to some pretty interesting spots, and there's some pretty interesting places, and some more interesting experiences have been in bars on Broadway. So like over the years, like whether it's Playboy's Cappuccino Lounge up in Baden, or I believe that's still popping up there. But then there was like the, what was it called? It was down on Zepp in South Broadway. That place was dodgy as hell. Anyway, if you go down towards Carondelet, like the No Wake Zone is past, or Slow Tom's, and that's a new place now. But you'd be surprised, like, oh, I'm not welcome there for whatever reason, whether or not, it's like you're of a different color than the person that's in there that's primarily, or you're a different age, or you're not, you don't work at the factory across the street like everybody else. Like, just don't go in with an attitude, and 99% of the time you're going to be fine. I'm going to tell you what, that's pretty good odds. In that 1% of the time, you'll figure it out, and it's okay. Somebody might not be happy. That's pretty common too, actually, no matter where you go. You can go to the fanciest restaurant in town, and there's going to be somebody that's going to, be unpleasant too, I'm sure. And to just be able to feel it, because then you feel like you've actually been somewhere. Unlike, sadly, in a lot of places, and this was a problem I found in Chicago and some cities that have some, or in more transient areas of even this town, is sometimes you feel like you don't even know where you are. It's like I could be anywhere in the world, not in the world, but anywhere in the United States, or at least this part of the United States. I don't even know where I am. But you go to some of these bars, let's say on Broadway, you definitely know you're in Carondelet, or you definitely know you're in Baden, or you definitely know you're like near downtown. Like, it's like it's just a weird neighborhood / downtown vibe. Like you get at Bernie's over there on just off Broadway near North Side, and that's something like, I don't know, to me that really hits, to be able to feel like I was actually at a place that was distinct to that place. And if it's forgettable, that's fine. It's functional. I was able to get a good drink and some good food there. But if I can feel like I've been somewhere, and that's usually it's the owner. Sometimes it's literally the physical place. Like I didn't meet the owner of the Matchbox, but the physical place is so narrow, and it's wedged into the neighborhood, and it's a long ass bar, and it's got a clear function of that room is to get a drink at that bar. There's nothing else really there to do, and it's a very beautiful presentation. So sometimes a physical manifestation, and then that will set a vibe that then allows people to kind of stack together, which is what you get at a tight bar like that. And that can create its own vibe. But the owners can usually set a vibe by the type of bartender they have, and then the offerings they do, and then the kind of general physical setup that they have as well. But I could go on and on about the many different types of bars I've been to. That's what I did recently. I went up to Milwaukee, and or Wisconsin, and then on to Milwaukee, and like the bars that dot that state are amazing. And then you go into Milwaukee, it's like the capital of all these places, and it's like bars that have been owned by multiple generations of people. Those are usually pretty sweet. Like Carol's been over there at the Iowa Buffet, I believe, since the 70s. And there's been a bar there prior to that as well. And to be able to go multi-generation, and a lot of the ones in North St. Louis as well are multiple generations that go in there. A family that owns it, and then you see multiple generations that are going there. Although North St. Louis in particular is they have restrictions in terms of ages that are different than the South Side. You'll see a lot of 35 and up, 30 and up clubs up there. And it's something that I think about every once in a while, but to actually do that, keep out the riffraff a little bit. But it's something that's, that's an interesting thing. And then you talk to the bartender, well, why won't you take anybody under 35? I'm like, well, we might, but it also gives us good reason not to take in like a group of kids that are not ready for a place. And I get that too. Like when I see a bunch of kids coming in, I can see them like, I'm gonna have to card every single one of these kids. They're probably 21, but I bet you they're closer to 21 than they are 25. It's like, oh man, are they ready for this place yet? Do they even know what they're getting into? But that's why I feel it's important that people go to places like this, not necessarily in full party mode, but to come in and learn how to drink at your best, not just to get fucked up, just, to truly have a good time. And, we try to help guide people and do that if they're not doing that. Then sometimes we'll have to guide them right out the door if they're not going to participate as well. It's still a South City tavern, Sometimes there's some people that just aren't ready for it yet. So they can go to another place down the street. Kings Highway's got a lot of bars on it.
So obviously as a country, we have witnessed cocktails really take off, but in 2005, 2006, not a lot of people are probably, saying, hey, I got to get me an old fashioned, a whiskey sour, a sidecar, whatever. So talk to me about rolling out your menu and, what was that like in terms of, was it more of a curiosity? Were people ordering stuff? What was that like, and how have you seen that evolve over time?
There's definitely a curiosity factor. And then there was even though I was an experienced barman at that point, it's still, the stuff was still pretty new. Even, I made these drinks, I'd messed around with them, but to see them actually applied and served at a volume that I was hoping to achieve like we do now at the Royale, I hadn't really done before, we'd done some, but it was mostly really basic stuff. So that's when I was with Tim O'Connell and some other people as well, but we kind of cobbled together the backbone of what the original cocktail list of the Royale. And, there were some things on there that we had to change because, we actually have to push out these cocktails. And I've had to do that more than once on my cocktail menus to sort of do a full revision on it, because it's not just a place where you go in and it's super high service and you're just getting like, and those places can be fun. I go drink there too, but it's like the presentation's a big part of it, where you sit down and they might light a match or something and do some fun stuff to it and add in crazy garnishes with, 10 different mixes in there. So it was a mixture between, the customers were curious about the drinks and they were trying everything. They wanted to try everything, which was great. And then it was then a mixture of that with me trying to figure out how to make these drinks work on that scale. And I had to, the Subcontinental, which is one of our signature drinks that people love for good reason. Thank you, Tim. But, I had to adjust how that was done. I was juicing fresh to the drink, and that didn't last too long. And I was like, okay, and then I had to learn how long juices keep, things I can do to keep the juices, then catalog it, then marking them so then we know when juice needs to go, and then pouring it out, and then going fresh stuff, and then, keeping the stock moving. And then I opened up the cocktail making to, of course, the people that I was working with, but as well, I have people that I call from time to time, Matt McBride, some other people that when I do want to upgrade the cocktail list, I'll consult with them. And it's a very loose consortium of people that I'll talk to. And I've got some great people here on staff. Peter's been doing a fantastic job of kind of keeping it tight, and keeping it interesting, and then mixing it up. We do the Manhattan, we do the rye Manhattans, we do some, we do the Pegu clubs, we can do some of our own concoctions as well, and different. We started messing with infusions, a lot of things that I'm not the only game in town when it comes to making interesting new cocktails. It's just not the case. We were one of the only games in town. And I think it's great. Other people are doing it because, people were introduced to it, and they were introduced in a very approachable place here, but it's not the Ritz. This is not the fancy restaurant. This is a place on Kings Highway, and South Kings Highway. And it's been great to sort of evolve along with the customers, and then they still have their favorites, but I've been able to build a solid enough bar where we can still make just about, we can make a lot. I don't want to say everything, but a lot of things. So we now have like a catalog, a library of things that we can do. And the customers' tastes have, I think they've become more mature, for sure. And we've been able to become a little bit more experimental in what we've done. And some things work, some things don't, but that's fine. That's the beauty of an evolving list. And I've seen some places stay static, and they've done okay doing that, but that's not this place.
So I was also kind of wondering too, and now I've lost my question, which is just fine.
That's all right.
So there's obviously a lot of evenings that you've spent, at this tavern at this point. But is there a night that sticks out for one reason or another as just when the bar was humming at 11 in some kind of way, and it's just the right mix of people? There'd been an event. Obviously, you host all sorts of themed events here from time to time, but is there a night that just strikes you as like, wow, like that was a great night?
There's a lot of nights that get like that, I will say, because it's like, especially when it's super busy, maintaining a team of good people that work well together and with your customers is not always there. It's something that you work towards, and every once in a while it really hums. And I'll speak of probably one of the more recent times this has happened, and it's not necessarily a particular night, but it's since the pandemic had happened, which is probably the biggest thing that's ever happened in this business in my life, easily, if not since the building of this building. I can't think of anything else. Maybe like pulling a bunch of men out to go fight in a war was probably pretty hard on this business, stuff like that. This is close to that level kind of thing. But we had the pandemic, and then we were heading into the winter. It was last year, and I was doing my best to figure out how to keep things going while people were comfortable in a reasonable manner. And I've done some extensive build out on the courtyard, The garden is beautiful. And I think this was actually probably more when the garden started to, anyway, it was last winter or whatever. There's a few times I had a DJ playing records outside, and I've always loved playing records with my friends since I was a little kid, to when I was on the college radio station to today. And to have a friend playing really good music, people sitting around all these multiple fire pits, drinking, enjoying themselves in a very difficult time of a pandemic where people are getting sick and dying, and the chaos of that, just the secondary chaos is just nuts too that comes with that. But to have that time when people are here and to see the food coming out, people coming in, smiles on people's faces, and to see things like I could stand there and like, man, this is great. And you know what? And then it starts to snow, and there's people are not batting an eye. I'm like, this is insane. People are nuts. This is awesome. Everybody who's here tonight is not going to forget this night. They're not going to think of like this is just some other night. This is a very special night. And there's been quite a few of those as this has gone on, especially when people are dining when it wasn't a blizzard, but light snow coming down, and we have all these beautiful fire pits around, and people are smiling and laughing and just happy to be with each other. And to me, I was like, okay, we're providing a very important service. This is great. I think this is great. We need to keep this up. And I feel good about being in this business. This is the reason I want to be here. And to think about that time has been that's the kind of thing that keeps you going during the toughest period of your business. Because I had to come to the point of more than once, it's like, I might not make it in this business. I think I will. I'm bound and determined. I'm a strong guy. I can will myself into existence, maybe. But am I going to will myself into this existence and still want to do this? And I've seen this business break some people in the last almost 2 years. And it's already a business that breaks people already. But to break them and them lose their livelihood has been really hard. And I managed to be conservative in some ways about how I've done things. I'm only open 4 nights a week, not 7 nights a week, which goes against my original ethos of being a place there always for you. But that takes a personal toll too. 7 days a week, lunch, dinner, drinks, 15 years. So for the last 2, I've been shut down for a bunch of months over a couple periods of time, and maybe again, I said, I need to be more versatile. I'm going to have to, if I do 4 days a week, have a tighter staff, and just try to max it out when we're maxing out. I do have the TikTok 7 days a week, so if you need to get a drink, definitely go over there on a Tuesday. That's awesome. Great bartenders. But to have to be able to order fish tacos 100 hours out of the week, is that necessary when I can do it for 42 hours of the week? Yeah, no, we can do it for 42 hours a week. You can still get your fish tacos. It's just, $3.15 on a Tuesday, you're not going to be able to get them. That's fine. Although that's sometimes the most fun time to drink. But you know what? It can be great at 6 p.m. on Friday too.
Well, Steve, I know we also have a little bit of a timeline here tonight too, but I appreciate this conversation. I think we've covered a lot of good ground. Yeah. Anything else that you wanted to talk about that we haven't covered?
Kind of what we touched on a bit earlier is if you really do appreciate bars and the community around it, absolutely have your favorite place, whether it's here or another spot. That's great. But don't hold back in trying out new spots. Don't hold back. It's good for your head to try new things in general. And then if you try new social situations, places that might make you a little uncomfortable, and bring a friend if you feel a little uncomfortable. But it's so much fun, and there's so much to discover out there. And try to go to parts of town that you're unfamiliar with, that you might not think you might not even get along. As I was saying, I'll troll every part of this town, including even I went out to Frontenac. It's not my scene, but man, I want to see what it's like. It's a weird scene out there, I'll tell you that. But
I've got a bar for you as a city boy that I bumped into once. My friend Dave Dietrich brought it up again recently. Have you ever heard of Fireplace out in Valley Park?
I've heard of it. Do tell, though. I want to hear more about it.
I'll tell you what. If you go out there in the evening, in the winter, that's not hard. It is a place where you're pretty concerned if somebody's driving you there, you're pretty concerned that they're going to bury you in a hill somewhere, because you really do feel like you were driving into the deep woods, and then there's just this random tiny little office park sequestered down there. So Dave was recently brought it up to me. He's like, it's one of my favorite places to bounce around to now. But yeah, just the road to get there is lowercase h harrowing in its own way, where you're going to be like, this can't be right, but it's right.
Oh man. Well, that's I love that you brought that up, because I used to work out that way between Fenton, Kirkwood, and Valley Park. And Valley Park in particular, and this is late 80s, early 90s when I was a teenager. I think you described that whole scene, because you go from what seemingly like relatively, active area to I don't think anybody's going to hear me scream area. And then the flood's going to happen, and then my body will be gone. Yeah, it's that's the kind of place. And there's another place I went to. God, I can't remember the name of it right now. So some of the most fun areas that I love, and I know I'm going to keep going back to it, but what's so passionate about is that the other places I go to looking for bars, it kind of remind me of that, was if you go over to the east side, and I know people on the Missouri side of the river, I mean, you got problems. The river is not 25 miles wide. It's very short to get across. And it's an oasis in of its own, a lot of learning things. And you can get to the country real quick. So, in fact, it's kind of weird because of the way it works but you can literally you could take a bi-state bus and feel like you are in rural Illinois, because Illinois has more extensive bus lines over there because they actually believe in public transportation. But in East Carondelet, if you're not familiar with East Carondelet, it's across the river from Carondelet. Imagine that. But it is straight up farm town, Illinois, like one little post office, a VFW hall, and a bar, and that's it. And I don't think that bar is open now. Oh, it might be reopened. Who knows with the pandemic. But you go on there and you can look and you do a search for bars in the area, and then there's places that have 0 reviews. Now that's a place you need to go to. Now I would advise that, don't be afraid to go into a bar, but also maybe you should bring a friend if you're going to one of these places too, and make sure you tell them where you're going. So when they do try to bury you, no, I'm kidding. But there are some really odd little roadhouses that are probably like when you check in on your phone, it'll want you to check into places in the city of St. Louis, but you feel like you are 100 miles from St. Louis at least. And it's some fun little spots. I don't even know if they're open now. Some of these places look like they turn over, looks like, but you can do that going over there, and it's super fun. And Madison County, all those places over there, some weird little spots you can go into, man. And you can hold a whole day of it. And then there's some great food over. You stop at some of the Mexican places over in Fairmount City. Now I basically want to leave here and go drink, but we'll have to do one of these.
Yes.
We'll take this on the road or something. What do you say?
I think that sounds like a great plan.
No, those are the kind of things that I get very passionate about, and I could talk about them all day. And it's all around you. So I would just encourage people to go out and then just sit at the bar, talk to the bartender, talk to the person next to you. If they're disagreeable, you know what? Sometimes there's disagreeable people in the world. Then turn the other direction, talk to the other person. Most likely you're going to have a pretty interesting and memorable time, and it's going to be a lot better than just going home and looking at Facebook or, just doing the same thing you've always done. And then, of course, come back to your favorite places, because that's where you kind of build your thing.
Yeah, no, I appreciate where you went with that, because, it was never a discouragement against that, because it's certainly fun to walk into that. And I have a couple friends who live on the east side, and it is interesting, like just certain parts when you're driving over, you're like, we're near a city, right? Because it certainly feels very country, very fast over there.
Yeah, people keep saying St. Louis is so small. I'm like, no, I'll tell you what, I'll take you somewhere to St. Louis. You're not going to know where the hell you are, and you're going to think that you're in another, more than just another state, like like a far, far, far away. Granted, city's got some wild bars. Anyway, I go on and on about the finer reaches. I would recommend just every once in a while mixing it up a little bit. Go out with your friends, just do a quick little bar hop, 1, 2, 3. You don't have to get hammered. Just have a drink at each one and just go out. And as we come out of this pandemic, and hopefully, we will sooner than later. And I I got positive thinking. I think we're in for a little hiccup here, but I think that's all it's going to be is a heavy hiccup, but still we're going to get through it, and, when we can go out and we can feel comfortable about that. And, who knows, I might see you over at maybe, Ernie's Elmo's Love Lounge over on Olive, and hopefully he'll have hot tubs at that time. Who knew we had a hot tub bar coming into St. Louis?
We have a hot tub bar coming. So I have to say, I'll echo your point with the current. For anybody listening that for some reason hasn't been to the Royale or hasn't been to Brennan's, I don't know what you're doing with your life, but currently the board at Brennan's apparently says it might be the booze talking, but I'm feeling recklessly optimistic about the new year.
Yes, goddamn right. Cheers to Kevin for reminding us of those of that great, reckless, drunken optimism that I am fully supportive of. And I basically want to leave here and go drink at every single place I mentioned tonight.
Perfect. It'll be a long time, but Steve, thank you for this. This is awesome. Would love to talk again sometime.
For sure.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it. Hey, everybody. Thanks for listening. If you liked the interview, the transcript and show notes are located at decodingcocktails.com/podcast. The Decoding Cocktails podcast is produced by Chris Bay and myself, Chris LeBeau. Subscribe to avoid missing an episode, and if you think this is good stuff, share it with a friend or review us on your listening platform. And check out our newsletter, Cocktail Confidential. Remember, the best way to get better at mixology is to practice. And the best way to do that is in the company of friends and family. Happy cocktailing, everybody.